You ever move somewhere thinking you've finally found peace? That was me, about 6 months ago, unloading boxes into a house that still smelled like new carpet and paint, watching the sun stretch over rows of perfect lawns and matching mailboxes. It was the kind of neighborhood where the sprinklers all clicked on at 6 a.m. sharp, like an orchestra. You could set your watch by it. Maple Glen, that was the name. Sounded calm, didn't it? Maple Glen. Like a place where arguments ended with potluck dinners and everyone waved on their way to the mailbox. I'd spent 25 years in uniform, 10 of those as a detective, and the last few as deputy chief before finally landing the top job. Police chief. Nice ring to it, right? But I'll tell you something no one admits. Cops don't crave excitement. Not the good ones. We crave quiet, predictable, ordinary. So when I signed those closing papers, I pictured quiet mornings, my old dog snoozing on the porch, my daughter's laughter when she came over on weekends. No sirens, no paperwork, no one arguing over who left their trash cans out too long. That first week was perfect. My neighbors waved politely. Someone dropped off banana bread with a note that said, "Welcome to the neighborhood, Chief Keller. We're so glad to have you." Even the HOA seemed friendly enough, judging by the glossy welcome packet with words like community and togetherness printed in cursive. I didn't bother to read the whole thing. I figured, how bad could it be? Every morning, I'd step outside with my coffee, black, no sugar, and breathe in that suburban perfume. Fresh-cut grass, a hint of fertilizer, and the faint smell of somebody's bacon drifting across the cul-de-sac. Kids bike to the park at the end of the street. Retired folks walk tiny dogs in matching sweaters. I'd nod, they'd nod back. The world felt unmanageable. Now, my daughter Lily, she's 17. Bright kid, sarcastic like her old man, and she bakes when she's stressed. After her mom passed, she started spending weekends with me. We'd cook, talk, watch movies. She'd leave little drawings on the fridge before heading back to her aunt's for school. Those weekends were my favorite part of the week. That girl could turn any house into a home. So on one Saturday morning, she pulled up in her little blue sedan, carrying a tray of chocolate chip cookies she'd baked at 6 a.m. "For you and your neighbors," she said proudly. I told her the neighbors might faint if a teenager approached them carrying sugar, but she just rolled her eyes. She parked on the curb right in front of my house, hopped out, and the day went on like any other. We grilled burgers that evening, talked about her college applications. She teased me for wearing socks with sandals. At sunset, she drove back to her aunt's, and I went to bed smiling. Peaceful day. Normal. Uneventful. Then, the next morning, I went to check the mail. There it was, a white envelope, hand-delivered, stamped with Maple Glen Homeowners Association. The logo had an oak leaf and a slogan under it. Pride through order. That should have been my first clue. I opened it, still sipping coffee. Notice of violation. It began in bold. Your residence has been found in violation of Section 8B, unauthorized vehicle on premises. All guest vehicles must be pre-registered through the HOA visitor portal prior to arrival. Fine. $75. I read it twice, thinking it had to be a mistake. Then I looked closer. There was a timestamp. 2:14 p.m. yesterday. That was exactly when Lily had been inside, helping me flip burgers. I chuckled at first. Thought maybe it was an automated thing. Some camera caught her license plate or whatever. I even called the number on the notice. No answer, just a voicemail saying, "Thank you for calling Maple Glen HOA. Leave a message, and remember, compliance keeps our community safe." Safe, I muttered. From what? Teenagers bearing cookies? That evening, Lily called to check in. I told her about the letter. She snorted so hard I heard milk shoot out her nose. "Dad, am I a criminal now?" she asked. "Guess I should turn myself in before they issue a warrant." I laughed, but a part of me didn't. There was something about that letter, the tone, the "we're watching you" flavor of it. I decided to let it slide. Pay the fine if I had to, keep the peace. I dealt with bigger egos than whoever sent that notice. I figured this was some automated bureaucracy, maybe a little overzealous neighbor clicking buttons in an online system. The next morning, I got my answer. I was mowing the lawn. enjoying the hum of the engine and the smell of cut grass, when I noticed a woman standing at the corner of my driveway. Early 50s, short haircut, pressed khakis, clipboard in hand. The posture of someone who corrected other people's posture. She had that permanent squint of authority, like a hall monitor who never retired. She waved. "Good morning. You must be Mr. Keller." "Tom's fine," I said, turning off the mower. "I'm Karen Hemsley," she said, extending a hand. "President of the Maple Glen Homeowners Association." I shook her hand. Firm handshake, but the kind that meant she wanted you to know it was firm. "I hope everything's going well," she said, smiling just wide enough to show control, not warmth. "We like to make sure all new homeowners are aware of our policies." "Oh, I read the packet," I said. "Well, skimmed it." Her smile twitched. "Then you might have missed the section about guest vehicle registration." I wiped my hands on my jeans. "Ah, yes, I got a notice about that. My daughter was visiting. Didn't realize she needed government clearance to park." She didn't laugh. Not even a smirk. "We've had incidents in the past. Teenagers speeding, leaving trash, loud music. We can't be too careful." "Understandable," I said. "But she was just here for the afternoon. No loud music, unless you count Fleetwood Mac." Karen wrote something on her clipboard. "Still, the policy applies to everyone. Rules keep the community safe." That line, "rules keep the community safe," was one I'd heard my whole career, usually from someone who didn't understand rules at all. "Of course," I said lightly. "Wouldn't want chaos breaking out." Her smile didn't change, but I saw her jaw tighten. She handed me a brochure. "This outlines all procedures. I suggest you register any future visitors in advance." "We wouldn't want another notice." "Wouldn't want that," I agreed. She nodded curtly and walked off, clipboard hugged to her chest like a shield. I watched her go, mower still off, birds chirping in the quiet that followed. Somewhere down the street, a wind chime tinkled, too cheerful for the moment. I looked at that brochure, Community Pride Through Order. A dozen rules about fence heights, mailbox colors, lawn ornaments, and the exact shade of approved mulch. That's when it hit me. I'd seen people like Karen my whole life. Not criminals, not villains, just folks who got a little power and forgot it came with limits. That night, I sat on the porch, sipping a cold beer, staring at the quiet neighborhood I thought I'd finally found peace in. The streetlights glowed a soft yellow. Somewhere, a sprinkler hissed on schedule. It was all so perfectly calm, except for that envelope sitting on the table beside me. The first crack in the picture-perfect world. I picked it up, turned it over, and read the words again. Notice of violation. I didn't know it yet, but that letter was the first domino. The moment where peaceful neighborhood turned into a case study in suburban absurdity. Because in Maple Glen, the only thing scarier than crime was breaking the bylaws. That letter changed everything. I didn't even plan on going to that HOA meeting. Honestly, I thought ignoring it would make it all fade away. But then I saw the little notice taped to my mailbox. Quarterly community meeting. Attendance encouraged for all homeowners. Encouraged, in HOA language, usually means mandatory if you don't want another fine. So, Thursday evening, I found myself sitting in a beige folding chair, staring at a table covered in lukewarm coffee, off-brand donuts, and a banner that said, Maple Glen, Pride Through Order. The donuts were dry enough to qualify as building materials. The room smelled faintly of coffee, copier ink, and the kind of tension that only comes from people with too much time and too little to do. Around 20 homeowners were scattered about, the same folks I saw jogging at dawn and trimming hedges in matching gloves. And at the front of the room stood none other than Karen Hemsley herself, clipboard in one hand, gavel in the other, like she'd been elected to Congress instead of running a suburban neighborhood. "Good evening, everyone," she began, tapping the gavel. "Let's maintain order. We have a few pressing matters to address tonight." She started reading off the agenda like it was a national security briefing. Overgrown hedges, trash bins visible from the road, unauthorized decorations, and, you guessed it, guest vehicle violations. My name came up right between mulch color discrepancies and fence non-uniformity. Mr. Keller, she said, looking up with a practiced smile. We noticed your residence had a guest vehicle parked without prior registration. I raised my hand, keeping my voice steady. Yes, ma'am. My daughter was visiting for the weekend. It was an oversight. Understandable, she replied, but the tone said barely. As a reminder, our community safety policy requires all vehicles to be pre-approved. It keeps our neighborhood secure. I wanted to ask if Al Capone was hiding in her begonias, but I didn't. Instead, I nodded. Got it. Won't happen again. She smiled wider, pleased that she'd educated me. Then, right before moving on, she added, We all have to follow the rules, Chief Keller. Even law enforcement. A few chuckles scattered through the room. The kind that aren't mean but not friendly either. I gave a polite smile. Of course. Can't imagine what this country would do without law and order. Couple people laughed. Quietly, nervously. Karen didn't. After the meeting, as I was heading out, one of the older residents stopped me by the door. Don't take it personal, he whispered. She fined me last year because my wreath had glitter on it. Said it was reflective material. I smiled. Thanks for the warning. That should have been the end of it. Just one petty woman and a rulebook thicker than a Bible. But as I'd learn, with some people, power isn't a job. It's a hobby. The next weekend, Lily came over again. This time, she parked not in front of my house, but in the designated guest area near the clubhouse, just to avoid another incident. She even joked, Dad, I registered myself through your HOA portal. I'm official now. We laughed about it. 10 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Karen, clipboard, smile sharpened to a blade. Good afternoon, she said, leaning slightly to peer past me into the house, as if expecting to catch someone mid-crime. I noticed a young woman by the clubhouse. Is she your visitor? She is, I said evenly. My daughter, actually. Karen pursed her lips. I wasn't aware minors were allowed unaccompanied near community property. She's 17, I said. She's allowed near community oxygen, right? Her smile thinned further. We've had problems before, teenagers loitering, skateboarding, causing property damage. We simply can't be too careful. I wanted to laugh, but her expression told me she was dead serious. Karen, I said gently, she's literally carrying a box of cookies. If she starts tagging stop signs, I'll make the arrest myself. Karen didn't move, didn't smile. She just clicked her pen and wrote something on her clipboard. I'll make a note of our conversation. Thank you for your cooperation. And she walked off. Lily came in a few minutes later, holding her phone. Dad, was that lady just taking pictures of my car? Probably documenting a dangerous youth sighting, I said. We both laughed. But underneath it, something in me tightened. I'd spent my whole career teaching officers how to defuse tense situations, how to de-escalate. But you can't de-escalate a person who thrives on escalation. The next day, I was washing the car when 2 police cruisers rolled slowly into the neighborhood. Familiar units. I waved automatically. They slowed down, and I saw the looks on their faces. Half confusion, half embarrassment. One of them, Officer Daniels, stepped out. He looked 25 but carried himself like he'd been through 4 divorces already. Chief, he said awkwardly. We got a call. Report of a suspicious person in a blue vehicle. Young female, possibly casing homes. I just stared at him for a second. You're kidding. He shook his head. Wish I was. Behind him, Karen was standing across the street with her arms folded, wearing the expression of a woman who believed she'd just saved the neighborhood from collapse. Lily was sitting on the porch steps, scrolling her phone, utterly unaware that she was now the prime suspect in the Maple Glen crime wave. I sighed, motioned Daniels closer, and lowered my voice. That's my daughter. She's been sitting there eating a cookie for the past 10 minutes. Daniels rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah. We figured when we saw your address come up. Dispatch didn't connect the dots. Karen started marching over. Excuse me, officers. Did you find her? She's been parked there for at least 20 minutes. Daniels looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. Ma'am, he said carefully. She's not a suspect. She's the chief's daughter. Karen blinked. The chief? Yes, ma'am. Chief Keller. This is his residence. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again. You could practically see her brain buffering. Oh, she finally said. Well, I was just following protocol. Which one? I asked, keeping my voice calm. The one about baked goods or teenage daughters? Her face flushed. There's no need for sarcasm. We all have to do our part to maintain order. I agree, I said softly. But next time you call 911, maybe make sure the emergency isn't a family reunion. The officers tried not to smile. Karen huffed, turned on her heel and walked away, clipboard tucked tight like a life preserver. After they left, Lily stood up, looking half embarrassed, half furious. She called the cops on me? For sitting. Apparently, I said, leaning on the porch railing. You're Maple Glen's public enemy number one. We both laughed, but not for long. Because while that should have been the end of it, I knew people like Karen didn't stop when they were wrong. They doubled down. That night, I sat at my desk going through paperwork, but I kept replaying that moment. Watching two of my own officers walk up my driveway because of a call that never should have been made. I didn't get angry often anymore. But this wasn't anger. It was something colder. The kind of feeling you get when you realize someone isn't just petty. They're proud of it. I could have filed a report for misuse of emergency services. I could have embarrassed her publicly. But that's not how you deal with people like that. Not if you want the lesson to stick. Instead, I poured another cup of coffee, looked out the window at the quiet street under the glow of streetlights, and said out loud to no one in particular, All right, Karen, you want to play rules? Let's play rules. And that was the moment the line was drawn. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in something far sharper. I didn't know it yet, but Maple Glen was about to learn what happens when you try to outpolice the police. Because I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a man with a badge, a filing cabinet, and all the time in the world. And she had just declared war over cookies. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. There's a saying in law enforcement. Never start a fight you don't understand. The thing about HOA Karens is they never understand the fight they start. They think the rules make them untouchable. But rules? Rules are just tools. And I've spent half my life mastering them. For a few days I played it cool. Mowed the lawn, waved at neighbors, took my morning walks past that stupid community pride starts here sign without saying a word. But inside, I was already turning gears. I'd handled everything from domestic disputes to budget hearings. I knew how bureaucracy worked. It didn't move fast, but it moved deep. Karen, on the other hand, started doubling down. I could tell she'd been bragging about handling the situation. A few of the neighbors stopped making eye contact, which told me she'd spun the story her way. Probably told them she stopped a dangerous teen from casing houses. Hero of the cul-de-sac. I let her have it. For now. On Thursday, a new HOA Community Safety Bulletin arrived in my mailbox. Bold red letters. Inside, due to recent incidents involving unregistered visitors, the board is instituting temporary community patrols and ID checks for guests under 25. We appreciate your compliance in keeping Maple Glen safe. ID checks? In a suburban neighborhood? You'd think we were guarding Fort Knox. I remember standing there in my driveway, letter in one hand, coffee in the other, just staring at it. The absurdity was so rich I almost laughed. Almost. The next day, a small folding table appeared near the entrance to the neighborhood. A few orange cones. A hand-painted sign that read Maple Glen Checkpoint. And standing there, clipboard ready, sun hat on, Karen. Greeting every car like she worked border control. Good morning, she chirped to one driver. Can I see your guest registration? I could see the poor man's confusion from a block away. This was getting out of hand. And the thing was, it wasn't even legal. That night, I pulled the HOA bylaws out of the file drawer. The thing was the size of a phone book and smelled faintly of toner and misery. I started reading. section by section. It was like watching someone try to micromanage God. There were rules for fence colors, flagpole heights, mailbox shapes, everything but the proper way to breathe. But then, somewhere around section 14C, I found something interesting. Security measures and physical restrictions of access must be approved by municipal compliance prior to installation. That meant the checkpoint, the cones, the cameras she'd put up near the clubhouse. Every bit of it was a violation of city code. And that's when the idea clicked into place. I didn't need to yell, didn't need to fight. I just let the paperwork do the talking. The next morning, I put on my uniform, not for drama, just habit, and drove down to City Hall. The receptionist recognized me right away. "Chief Keller, what brings you in?" I smiled. "Just here as a resident today. I'd like to file a courtesy compliance inspection request." She nodded and handed me the form. I filled it out carefully. Unauthorized obstruction of public right-of-way by Maple Glen HOA checkpoint. Under reason for request, I wrote, "Community safety concern." The clerk looked at it, eyebrows rising. "You want to add any urgency tags to this?" "No rush," I said. "But it'd be nice if someone stopped by before they start issuing passports." She laughed softly and stamped it. "We'll send someone by." By the time I got home, I could see Karen's little checkpoint in full swing. She had a table umbrella now, a radio, and 2 volunteers, one of whom I'm pretty sure used to deliver pizzas. Every car stopped. Every visitor logged. And she looked proud. I gave her a polite wave as I passed. She didn't wave back, just scribbled something down on her clipboard. That evening, the neighborhood group chat lit up. I don't usually check those, but curiosity got me. There were messages like, "Does anyone else think the checkpoint's overkill? Karen says it's temporary, but we had to show ID just to visit the pool." My babysitter turned around and left. Karen herself chimed in, "Safety is everyone's responsibility. If we all cooperate, this will pass quickly." I couldn't help but smile. Cooperation is a funny word when you forget consent. 2 days later, the first city inspector arrived. Plain sedan, clipboard, orange vest. He parked by the clubhouse, walked up to the checkpoint, and started talking to Karen. I couldn't hear everything, but the tone shifted quick. She gestured wildly, then pulled out papers. He pointed at the cones, the cameras, then handed her a form and left. By sunset, the table and cones were gone. Just like that. I didn't gloat, didn't even mention it to anyone. But the next morning, another envelope appeared in everyone's mailbox. Temporary suspension of checkpoint pending permit approval. That was HOA speak for "we got caught." A few days went by. Things were quiet again. Peaceful. I thought maybe she'd take the hint. But Karen wasn't the type to back down. She was the type to dig deeper. That weekend, I heard her at the clubhouse talking loudly to a small group. "Someone reported us to the city. Someone's trying to undermine the HOA." Her voice carried like a foghorn. I didn't have to guess who someone was. I kept my distance, trimming hedges, pretending not to notice. The next day, another letter. Reminder. All homeowners must submit updated vehicle information by Monday. That was her way of saying I still have power. But here's the thing. When you push too hard, even quiet neighbors start pushing back. I noticed more eye rolls, fewer nods her way. One guy down the street started parking his truck half a foot over the line, just to mess with her. Another strung Halloween lights in September, daring her to issue a fine. The mood had shifted. And me? I wasn't done. See, when I read those bylaws, I didn't just find one violation. I found a dozen. Turns out, the HOA's security committee didn't have a legal charter. Their cameras were installed on public poles without permits. And those safety emails she sent, they counted as official notices, which legally required review by the city's housing division. So I filled out a few more forms. Politely, professionally, thoroughly. Each one started the same way. Courtesy inspection request. Each one ended the same way. Filed by T. Keller, resident. By the time I was done, Maple Glen's administrative inbox looked like a Christmas tree. I didn't brag. Didn't announce it. I just went about my business, mowing, walking, waving. A week later, a city truck rolled through. Then another. Inspectors with cameras and clipboards walking the streets. The HOA board tried to act casual, but panic was in the air. That night, I got an email from a neighbor I barely knew. Subject line, "Did you do this?" The message read, "Whatever's going on, thank you." Someone had to stop her. I didn't reply, didn't need to. Instead, I sat on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee, watching the streetlights flicker on. The same calm breeze, the same faint sound of sprinklers in the distance. But it felt different now. For the first time since I'd moved in, the street was quiet because people wanted it quiet, not because they were afraid of fines. I took a deep breath, leaned back, and thought about how some fights don't need shouting. They just need precision. That's when my phone buzzed. City Inspector. Voicemail. Chief Keller? Just wanted you to know your HOA's in for a few citations. We're flagging multiple unpermitted installations. Should be interesting for their next meeting. I smiled. The paperwork was doing all the heavy lifting, and they had no idea what was coming next. The first sign that my plan had landed came on a Monday morning, right around the time the garbage truck makes its slow parade down Maple Glen Drive. Usually, you'd hear the hiss of hydraulics, the thud of bins, and then silence. But that morning, the neighborhood had something else. Voices. Raised ones. I stepped out onto my porch with a mug of coffee, and there it was. 3 people standing around the clubhouse entrance, all red-faced and animated. One of them waved a stack of papers like they were holding evidence in a courtroom. From my porch, I could hear every other word. Fines, illegal, city violations. It was music to my ears. Word spread fast. By noon, everyone knew. The HOA had been slapped with not 1, but 3 citations from the city. Unauthorized security structure, improper signage, and, my personal favorite, installation of surveillance equipment on municipal property without permit. Each came with a fine. And if you know anything about HOAs, you know they love to give fines. They don't know what to do when they get them. That night, we got an email from the HOA board. Urgent community meeting. Attendance required. You could almost smell the panic between the lines. When I walked in, the beige clubhouse felt like a courtroom. Fluorescent lights buzzing, coffee urn bubbling, everyone whispering in clusters. Karen stood at the front with her gavel and her clipboard, but her usual confidence had slipped. Her posture was too stiff, her smile too tight. The kind of look someone wears when they've convinced themselves they're still in control, right before the dam breaks. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began. "As some of you may know, there's been a misunderstanding with the city regarding our community safety measures." A hand shot up in the back. It was old Mr. Green, who usually kept quiet unless someone's lawn was over an inch too tall. "You mean the checkpoint?" Karen hesitated. "Yes, well, the city apparently misunderstood our intent. They fined us $3,000. Someone interrupted. "Who's paying that?" Karen tried to calm the room, tapping the gavel. "Now, let's not panic." A woman in a floral blouse spoke up. "You're the one who built that stupid booth. I told you we needed permits." The murmurs turned into a low rumble. You could feel the tide turning. I sat in the back, silent, sipping the world's worst coffee and enjoying the show. Karen's eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. I could almost hear the click of the mental gears as she decided where to aim her frustration. "Chief Keller," she said, forcing a smile. "Since you're here, maybe you can clarify some things. We've been told the city got an anonymous complaint. It just so happens the timing lines up with recent events." I set my cup down. "I couldn't say, ma'am, but from what I hear, they don't act on rumors. They act on code violations." A couple of chuckles rippled through the room. Karen's face tightened like a drawstring. "Yes, well," she said, "we all appreciate community safety, don't we?" I nodded. "We do. Though, in my experience, real safety doesn't usually come with a clipboard." That did it. A few people actually laughed. Karen banged her gavel so hard it bounced. "Order. Let's maintain order. Order." There it was again, the word that people like her used when what they really meant was control. The meeting went downhill from there. She tried to rally the board, but her allies were turning skittish. One man whispered something about resigning. Another suggested holding a vote to suspend the safety committee. And just like that, the power she'd built with fear and fines started crumbling under its own weight. After the meeting, she cornered me outside. The night air was cool, the crickets loud enough to fill the awkward silence between us. "Did you report us?" she asked. I looked her dead in the eye. "No, ma'am. I didn't report anyone. I just believe in following the rules." "You think this is funny?" she snapped. "You embarrassed me. You embarrassed this community." "Karen," I said, my voice calm. "You called the police on my daughter for bringing me cookies. I think we passed the embarrassment stage a while ago." She blinked, stunned into silence for a moment. Then she straightened, her chin high. "You may have power downtown, but around here, I enforce the rules." "Not anymore," I said softly. She stormed off without another word. By the next morning, things were unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. Someone leaked the inspection reports to the neighborhood chat. Screenshots spread like wildfire. People were furious, not at the city but at the HOA. Turns out those fines were going to be paid out of everyone's dues. "Why should we pay for her mistake?" one message said. "Maybe she should step down," said another. Karen tried to do damage control. She sent out a long email, paragraphs of legal-sounding nonsense about miscommunications with municipal authorities and temporary suspension of safety initiatives. But the more she tried to justify herself, the worse it got. That evening, a group of neighbors gathered near the clubhouse, voices rising. Someone brought out lawn chairs and popcorn. It wasn't a protest. It was a spectacle. Suburban theater at its finest. Karen showed up halfway through, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "Everyone, please," she called out. "We're handling it internally." A man in a baseball cap shouted back, "You mean like how you handled the teenagers? Or the trash cans? Or the mailbox fines?" The crowd laughed. Karen's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. Right then, one of the city inspectors showed up again. Clipboard in hand, vest glowing in the evening light. He handed her another notice. "Just following up," he said. "You've got 15 days to correct the violations or face an additional fine." You could have heard a pin drop. Then someone clapped. Then another. Soon half the block was applauding. It wasn't cruel, it was cathartic. Karen looked around, eyes wide, realizing she'd lost the room. She dropped her clipboard, muttered something about ungrateful neighbors, and marched back toward her house. I thought that might be the end of it. But if the story's taught me anything, it's that some people can't accept defeat. They just look for new battlegrounds. The next morning, I got an email from City Hall. Subject: Inquiry. Complaint filed by HOA President. Apparently, Karen had lodged a formal complaint claiming I was harassing the HOA and abusing city connections for personal retaliation. Now that was funny. I actually laughed out loud, nearly spilling my coffee. The city attorney copied me on their polite reply. "Ms. Hemsley, all actions taken against Maple Glen HOA were based on verified code violations. Resident Mr. Keller acted entirely within his rights as a private citizen." I didn't need to say a word. She'd done the damage herself. Later that afternoon, I saw her walking briskly toward her mailbox. She didn't even glance my way. I gave her a friendly nod anyway. "Afternoon, Karen." She didn't respond, just yanked open the mailbox and froze. Inside was a bright orange envelope. Another citation, this one personally addressed to her. Violation of municipal code. Unauthorized obstruction of public easement. Fine, $2,500. She stood there for a long moment, envelope in hand, face pale as chalk. Then she turned and went back inside without a word. That night, the neighborhood was unusually quiet. No safety bulletins. No patrols. No email blasts. Even the sprinklers seemed to come on softer, like the whole street was exhaling. I sat on my porch with a cold beer, looking out over the stillness. The crickets, the smell of fresh grass, the hum of a faraway lawnmower. For the first time since moving here, it felt like the place had remembered what peace sounded like. And yet, I knew this wasn't the end. People like Karen don't just disappear, they regroup. She tried to rally the board, maybe run again, maybe claim she was the victim. But the thing about order? It doesn't belong to whoever shouts loudest. It belongs to whoever understands how to use silence. At that thought, I chuckled to myself and muttered under my breath. At this point, I've got to ask, have you ever dealt with an HOA like this? Drop your story in the comments, hit subscribe if you love poetic justice, and let's see how many of us have survived HOA brutality. Then I leaned back in my chair, the porch light casting long shadows across the lawn, and took another sip, because the real storm hadn't even hit yet. The election was coming, and I had a feeling, when the votes were counted, Maple Glen's little empire of control was going to crumble in spectacular fashion. The letter that started it all was about my daughter's visit. The next one, the one about to hit Karen's desk, would end her reign entirely. Then I got the message that changed everything again. Election day in Maple Glen didn't look like democracy. It looked like a bake sale hosted by people who'd rather be suing each other. The clubhouse was buzzing before sunrise. Cars lined both sides of the street, lawn chairs popped up under trees, and neighbors who hadn't spoken in months suddenly remembered how to make eye contact. The smell of coffee and tension filled the air. You could practically see the invisible lines dividing the street. Those for Karen, those against her, and those pretending they didn't care but had already printed extra ballots, just in case. I showed up late on purpose. I wasn't campaigning. I wasn't there to make a scene. I just wanted to watch. I'd already done my part. Quietly, politely, and thoroughly, the city fines had shaken the board. The whispers had turned into conversations, the conversations into complaints, and the complaints into one big collective enough. Karen, of course, arrived early. She wore a blazer the color of wet cement and heels that clicked like punctuation marks. Her hair was sprayed into submission, and her clipboard, her ever-present symbol of control, was tucked under her arm like a trophy. She smiled too hard and waved at everyone, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Good morning. Let's make Maple Glen proud today." Behind her, a folding table displayed the words, HOA election. Community leadership starts here. Someone had tried to add a smiley face sticker to it, but it was already peeling off. I took a seat in the back, coffee in hand, pretending to read something on my phone. Across the room, I spotted Lily helping Mrs. Green set up a donation box for the community garden. She caught my eye and grinned, our silent inside joke, the calm before the chaos. Karen called the meeting to order with her trademark gavel tap. "Let's maintain order," she said, though no one was out of line yet. Old habits die hard. She began with her presidential address, a 10-minute speech about community pride, shared values, and the challenges of leadership. "Sometimes," she said dramatically, "doing what's right means being misunderstood." Someone muttered, "Or just wrong." A few people snickered. Karen's smile didn't move, but her eyes narrowed. When the time came for nominations, 3 names were called. Karen, the current president. A younger woman named Melissa who worked in accounting and had the patience of a saint. And a retired Navy veteran named Bill Thompson who mowed everyone's lawn when their mower broke down. 2 decent choices, and one who thought she was queen of Maple Glen. Ballots were passed out, pencils scratching quietly. You could feel the collective breath being held. For years, Karen had ruled by intimidation, fines, warnings, public shaming. Now, the neighborhood had a chance to speak back in the only language she understood, procedure. While the votes were being counted, Karen walked over to me. Her voice was polite, but it had that brittle edge of someone used to being obeyed. "I hope you're satisfied," she said. "Not yet," I said calmly. "Still waiting on the results. You've humiliated me, you know that? The police, the city, the neighbors. Everyone thinks I'm the villain." I set down my cup and looked her in the eye. "Karen, I didn't make you the villain. You just kept auditioning for the role." Her mouth opened, then closed again. For once, there was no comeback. She walked away, heels stabbing the floor with each step. 10 minutes later, The board treasurer stood up with the results. You could hear the rustle of paper, the little gasp when she read them aloud. For HOA president, Melissa Grant, 42 votes. Karen Hemsley, 3. Silence. Then, applause. Real applause. Karen's face went still, then blank. She tried to speak, something about recounts or procedural errors, but her voice cracked halfway through. Nobody moved to support her. Even the gavel she'd loved so much just sat there on the table, quiet as a confession. I stayed seated, watching her hands tremble as she gathered her papers. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered Lily, standing on that porch while patrol cars pulled up because of a suspicious youth, and the sympathy evaporated. After the meeting, neighbors lingered outside, chatting in small, relieved groups. It was like the air had been cleared, literally. The tension that had sat over the neighborhood like a fog had lifted. Someone laughed loudly for the first time in months. Kids rode their bikes again. Dogs barked freely without someone writing it down. A few people came up to thank me. "We knew you had something to do with it," one said, shaking my hand. "Couldn't have done it without you." I smiled. Didn't do anything special. Just followed the rules. Later that week, the new board sent out their first announcement. Short, simple, no clip art or passive-aggressive tone. "Dear neighbors, we want to thank you for your patience and support. We're committed to restoring balance, fairness, and friendliness in Maple Glen. No more surprise finds, no more fear of clipboards. Just community." And just like that, the kingdom of Karen crumbled into a democracy of common sense. 2 days later, I got an invitation from City Hall. They were hosting a public safety workshop topic, how to handle neighborhood disputes calmly and legally. Guess who they asked to lead it? I walked in that night wearing my uniform, the nameplate gleaming under the fluorescent lights. It was a small crowd, council members, neighborhood reps, even a few familiar faces from Maple Glen. And right in the front row, notebook open, sat Karen. She didn't look defiant anymore. She looked tired, maybe humbled, maybe just out of battles to fight. She took notes the whole time, never looked up. When it ended, people came up to thank me. She hung back until the room was nearly empty. Then she approached slowly, no clipboard, no gavel. "Chief Keller," she said quietly, "I wanted to apologize for how things went. It was awkward, but sincere." I gave her a small nod. "Apology accepted. We all make mistakes. The trick is not repeating them." She nodded. I resigned from the board completely. Figured someone else should take a turn at leadership. "Probably a good call," I said gently. "Enjoy being just a neighbor for a while." She smiled weakly. "I'll try." The next morning, Lily came by for a visit. She parked right in front of the house, unregistered, unbothered. No notes, no knocks. Just sunshine, birds, and the smell of fresh coffee from the kitchen. "Think she'll call the cops again?" Lily asked, grinning. I shook my head. "Not unless she wants to fine herself for disturbing the peace." We spent the afternoon cleaning the garage, playing music, and laughing. For the first time since moving in, the place felt like home again. A week later, an envelope showed up in the mail. For a split second, my stomach tightened, old reflex. But this one didn't say notice of violation. It said notice of appreciation. I opened it. Inside was a printed note from the new HOA board. "Dear Chief Keller, thank you for your patience, integrity, and example of calm leadership during recent neighborhood challenges. We appreciate your contribution to making Maple Glen a better place." At the bottom, in neat cursive, Melissa had added a handwritten line, "P.S. We owe your daughter an apology and a plate of cookies." I laughed out loud. Lily framed it and hung it by the front door. That weekend, I finally cut the grass again. The air smelled like summer, earthy, green, forgiving. As I pushed the mower past the curb, Karen drove by slowly in her SUV. She rolled down her window, gave me a little wave. I waved back, 2 fingers, peaceful ones this time. And just as she passed, I caught her smiling. Not the tight, polished smile of control, but something small and real. Maybe she'd finally remembered what neighborhood living was supposed to feel like. I stood there for a moment, watching the wind move through the trees, the late sun glinting off the mailboxes, all perfectly aligned in their silent little row. After everything, the fines, the calls, the meetings, the paperwork, it all came down to this. A street that finally felt human again. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It doesn't come with flashing lights or raised voices. Sometimes, it's just a moment of stillness. One where the good guys mow their lawns in peace, while the petty ones learn what silence feels like. And that silence, that simple peace, was the sweetest victory of all. A few months later, Maple Glen had changed so much it was almost unrecognizable. The same lawns, the same houses, the same neat row of mailboxes. But somehow, everything felt lighter. The air didn't hum with quiet tension anymore. You could walk down the street without feeling like someone was judging your trash bin placement or measuring your grass with a ruler. The HOA emails were short now, friendly even. One of them actually started with, "Hi neighbors," instead of, "Per community code section 9A. I almost didn't recognize it. I settled into a rhythm again. Early mornings with my coffee on the porch, the smell of dew and wet earth, the sprinklers ticking on in the distance. Every once in a while, I'd catch the sound of kids laughing, real laughter, not the hushed kind that stops when an adult walks by. One evening, someone down the street hosted a small barbecue, music playing just loud enough to be heard over the breeze. No one complained. No one called it in. That was new. Melissa, the new HOA president, was doing a fine job. She had this calm, common-sense way of leading that reminded me of good officers, people who didn't need to shout to be respected. She stopped by one morning with a box of donuts as a thank you for helping restore balance. I told her I didn't do anything. She smiled and said, "Exactly. That's what we needed." Every now and then, though, I'd see Karen. She still lived 2 houses down, still had her same perfectly trimmed hedges, still drove that silver SUV that looked like it had never seen a dirt road. But she'd changed too in her own quiet way. The clipboard was gone. The power stance replaced by something softer. When we passed each other on walks, she'd nod, sometimes even smile. One day, she stopped to say hello. "Morning, Chief," she said, her tone cautious but kind. "Morning, Karen," I replied. "How's retired life from the throne?" That got a laugh out of her. A real one. "Peaceful," she admitted. "I've taken up gardening. Turns out, it's nicer when you plant flowers instead of fines." I chuckled. "You'll get less hate mail, that's for sure." We chatted a bit about the weather, the neighborhood, her grandkids visiting next month. Then she surprised me by saying, "I owe you one more apology." I raised an eyebrow. "You already gave me one." "I know," she said. "But this one's for your daughter. I shouldn't have treated her the way I did. She was just being a kid." That one landed differently. I looked at her, and for the first time she wasn't defensive, wasn't pretending to be in charge. She just looked human. "I'll tell her," I said. "She'll appreciate that." Karen nodded, smiled faintly, and went back to her garden. For a moment, I just stood there watching her plant petunias where the old security booth used to stand. The irony wasn't lost on me. Life moved on. Lily graduated high school that summer. The whole neighborhood showed up to her little backyard celebration. We grilled, played music, and swapped stories about the old HOA days. Even Karen dropped off a plate of brownies. They were surprisingly good, too, though Lily later whispered, "Dad, you should probably test those for poison first." It was one of those perfect suburban evenings. Kids chasing fireflies, dogs weaving between lawn chairs, the smell of burgers and citronella candles. For once, Maple Glen actually felt like the kind of place it had always pretended to be. And sitting there, under the string lights Lily had hung up, I realized something I hadn't before. The story wasn't really about revenge. It wasn't even about winning. It was about restoring balance. Reminding people that authority without empathy becomes absurd. That the smallest power, in the wrong hands, can turn a quiet street into a battlefield. In my line of work, I'd seen people abuse power in big, catastrophic ways. But there's something uniquely dangerous about the small, petty kind, the kind that hides behind rules and clipboards and community standards. It doesn't look evil. It just looks official. That's what makes it so insidious. But it also makes the justice sweeter when it comes. Sometimes, all it takes to reset a community is one calm voice saying, "No, that's not how this works." Not yelling, not threatening, just holding the mirror up until the reflection speaks for itself. A few weeks later, the city invited me to speak again at another community leadership workshop. I almost declined. Public speaking isn't exactly my idea of a relaxing Thursday, but they insisted. "You're a case study now," they said. "A good one." I started that talk the same way I'd started the first, with a story. "I once lived in a neighborhood," I said, "where someone thought rules were more important than people. And for a while we all went along with it, because it was easier than dealing with confrontation. But the truth is, order without compassion isn't order at all. It's just fear dressed up in paperwork." I told them about the checkpoint, the fines, the irony of enforcing safety, so hard that nobody felt safe. And then I told them how it ended. Not with a fight, but with paperwork, patience, and a whole lot of quiet humor. The audience laughed at the right parts, nodded at the others. Afterward, a woman came up to me and said, "We've got our own Karen." I didn't think it was possible to deal with her without losing my mind. I smiled. "You don't fight fire with fire. You just let the paperwork smolder for a bit. Trust me. It spreads." When I got home that night, the street was calm. Porch lights glowed. A couple of dads were tossing a football. Someone's grill hissed. I could see the faint outline of the old checkpoint spot, now just a patch of grass. It made me grin. I sat on my porch and thought about how strange life can be. I'd spent a career dealing with crime, chaos, and conflict. But it was a suburban HOA that taught me the real art of de-escalation. Sometimes the enemy isn't evil, it's just bored. And sometimes the best weapon isn't power, it's patience. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee, I noticed something new. Karen had set out a bird feeder by her garden. A couple of sparrows hopped around it, pecking at seeds. She looked peaceful, hands in her gloves, humming quietly to herself. No clipboard in sight. Maybe redemption really does come in small doses. Around 10, my phone buzzed. A message from Melissa. "Hey Chief, thinking of doing a neighborhood barbecue next month. You in?" I typed back, "Wouldn't miss it. Just make sure it's city permitted." She replied with a laughing emoji. That afternoon, I walked to the mailbox. The sound of wind rustling through the trees, the smell of someone's freshly baked pie drifting across the street. It all felt like a different world than the one I'd moved into a year ago. Inside my mailbox was a single envelope, white crisp with the Maple Glen logo. For a second, instinct made my stomach tighten again. But when I opened it, all it said was, "Friendly reminder. The annual yard contest is next month. Keep those lawns green and your spirits high." I laughed out loud right there at the curb. Spirits high? Huh? That was progress. I walked back up the driveway thinking about how much had changed and how much hadn't. People were still people. There'd always be a Karen somewhere, a clipboard somewhere, a rule that goes too far. But there'd also be common sense, decency, and the occasional quiet rebellion to balance it out. That's the thing about neighborhoods. They're like families. You can't choose every member, but you can decide how you deal with them. You can fight or you can teach by example. I sat back on the porch, watching the sunset stretch over the street, turning every mailbox gold. For the first time, I realized I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. I wasn't the new homeowner or the police chief who made trouble. I was just Tom, the guy with the quiet house, the good coffee, and the daughter who brought cookies. Car drove by slowly. Karen's SUV. She waved again, all 5 fingers this time. I waved back. And as the light faded, I thought to myself, so this is what peace looks like. Not perfect, not rule-free, just human. So if your HOA ever sends you a letter like mine, about grass height, visitor cars, or some ridiculous safety measure, don't lose your cool. Don't yell. Don't stoop. Just smile, take a breath, and remember, you can't control the petty, but you can outsmart it. And sometimes that's all the justice the world needs.